Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome people to the meeting, and especially welcome our new members, as Sarah pointed out, Charlie and Kate. It's so exciting to have you join us. Just a quick, John, if you can move to the next slide, we're just going to go over the agenda really quickly for the meeting. We're going to do introductions, program updates, a 2023 wrap up of all of the things that we've accomplished over the last year. So I think now is the time to be thinking about that, as when I open it up and people freeze. So remember, start thinking now about reflecting on all of the work that's been done. Take a look at the head of the 2024 work plan that the staff have outlined, and then continued our conversation about accountability and the draft principles. And public comment today will be held at 10:45. If you'd like to do public comment, please submit your comments now or put it in the chat so that the staff can make sure to get that to us so that we can make sure to make time for you. The other component, I just want to remind people, little Zoom items, if people could remember to please stay on mute throughout unless you're speaking. It allows other people to hear you. If you're able to, it's great to have people on video. And then below there's a lot of people on this call, which is amazing and awesome. And so what's very helpful is to be able to, while you're facilitating so you can have voices heard, is to raise your hand. And that is at the bottom of your screen. There is a little happy face, and underneath it, it says reactions. And next to it is a little up arrow. And you can just click on it once and you'll see a little tiny hand there. And when you pop that up, your hand comes up, you jump to the top, and then we're able to call on people. All right. Anything before I hop into introductions? Okay, well, I'm gonna do, I think it would be great to actually have other board members do quick introductions too, but we've got to make it fast so that we can stay on time for the meeting. And so the first thing, I'd like people to say their name and if they have a pet. So my name is Felisa, and I have a Scottish Terrier, and I'm gonna move it to Peter.
Good morning. This is Peter Davidson, and I have a golden retriever.
Great. Shannon?
My name's Shannon, and I have a French Bulldog and a Dachshund.
Jen? Oh, Jim?
My name is Jim Hauser, and I have a rat terrier, Luna.
Oh. Teresa?
Hi, I'm Teresa Learn, and I have no pets at the moment.
Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Dennison, and I have a pit bull mutt mix named Ramona.
Kate, you get a little bit more. So tell us where you work and how you joined the board.
Oh. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Dennison. I am a long timer at the Department of Justice. I'm currently serving as a policy advisor to the Attorney General. I've worked with a number of you on consumer protection issues over the years, and I've done work on insurance related consumer protections. This is kind of my first foray into rate related issues. I'm really excited. I've been brushing up on the materials and hope that I can contribute to this important work. So nice to meet you all.
I have full confidence that you'll be a great contributor. Andrew?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew. I've got a 6.5-year-old puppy mixed mutt named Nova.
Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg, and we just had a foster cat named Brickheart who was adopted about a week ago, but we're between pets right now.
Charlie?
Good morning, Charlie Fisher. I don't have any pets. I'm the state director at OSPRG. I think many of you know us through our previous participation on this committee. and I'm just excited to be here. We're really interested in continuing to be a part of this really important space and conversation.
Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Kramer. I'm a member of the Oregon Health Policy Board and liaison to the Cost Growth Target Program. We have 2 cats, Harney, named for Harney County, where he came from, and Marina, who is found on the marina in Astoria.
Michael.
Hi all, I'm Michael Anderson Athey. I use he, him, his pronouns. We have a cat that's a tuxedo cat named Clover, and then a dog that is half German Shepherd and half Australian Blue Heeler cattle dog named Greta. And just a heads up, I have to jump during the middle of the meeting for another meeting, and I'll be back towards the end. Sorry.
Well, thank you. It's great to have you. Lawrence?
I'm Lawrence Fernstall. I have 2 guinea pigs, Sophie and Veronique.
Gil.
Hi, Gil Munoz with Virginia Garcia Health Center. Currently no pets, sadly.
Who am I missing? Jill.
We've got Nick and Jessica.
Thank you. Let's go, Nick.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were saving the big list for last, because they're all pets. We have 3 horses, 3 cats, 5 chickens, 2 goats, and a sheep. They all have names, but you don't need to hear them all.
That is one of the benefits of living in a rural Oregon.
Yeah, all our critters.
Or Northeast Portland, apparently. Jessica. Oh, Jessica?
Maybe while she's getting off mute, we also have
Right.
Herdesh and Karis on.
Great.
Yep, sorry, I was on the double mute. Do you mind telling me exactly? So I see it in the chat. They're asking for pets. I have 2 dogs. One is a Mac Nab, which is a Australian herding dog, working dog, and a new puppy, which is a Rhodesian Ridgeback, and she's just full of
Whoa.
energy.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Herdesh.
Yes, this is Horesh Lal, and I personally, my wife and I don't have any pets, but my daughters each have a dog and a cat, and they spend 95% of the time at my house, so we own them.
Oh, pet grandparents. Okay. Who else am I missing? Sarah.
Karis.
Karis.
Good morning, everybody. Kara Stoudemire Phillips with Moto Health. And I am so sorry. I live in the wrong state to say this, but I am not a pet person. And we don't have any pets. My kids want a dog, but they have not won that battle yet.
Okay, stay strong, Karis.
Okay.
And I think we have Julie as well.
Great. Julie, we're just saying our name and if we have any pets.
Julie Weller, I have a golden doodle and a German Shepherd.
Great. Anyone else I'm missing?
I think Greg Daniel
Oh, Greg, great.
was off trying to get everything set up here, but yeah, I've got 1 dog, and its favorite thing is to lay in front of the fireplace and say, "When is dinner?"
Perfect. Anyone else I'm missing?
Our last new committee member is going to be joining sometime in the next 10-15 minutes.
Okay, great. Sarah, tell us your pet, and then let's move to the next slide.
I'm Sarah Bartleman with OHA. I staff this committee, and I have a 14-year-old cat named Byron who frequently makes appearances.
He's ginormous, and hopefully we'll see him sometime slapping at Sarah's face and walking on her keyboard. Great. So you'll have in your packet a September meeting summary, staff drafted. Any questions or clarifications needed on that draft? Oh, Sarah just dropped it into the chat too. Well, if you have some, I feel like, and you just haven't had a chance to go over it quick, feel free to take a look at it, and then you can come back to it and put any information you need in the chat, or we can come back to that. Okay, great. So the next thing I think we want to move on to is program updates. So I'm going to kick it back over to Sarah.
Actually, Jeremy, can you go back to the new committee members? I think just we did, everyone was introduced in the introduction, so thank you. And then Jeremy Davis will be joining us shortly as our third new committee member. So this is also a program update. We had 3 committee members who stepped down, and last week the Oregon Health Policy Board approved our 3 new members. So welcome, and special thanks to them for jumping in, because we have not yet even done their orientation to this work yet. So we will be catching them up, and really grateful that they were able to join today. Okay, now for the rest of program updates. One more, please. Okay, also on the Oregon Health Policy Board, they had their annual retreat in October, and the policy board has had cost growth target work, cost containment as one of their priorities for the last couple of years. And at the retreat, they identified the cost growth target program as a key priority as part of a broader goal of ensuring healthcare affordability. And several board members are working in a smaller group to identify the board's relationship and the board's role with the cost growth target program and with this advisory committee moving forward for the next year, 2 years. A couple of things that came up in those initial conversations were bringing more attention to inequities in affordability and supporting the development of policies and ideas that improve affordability. And I think we'll talk about that more when we talk about our 2024 work plan. But just letting you know that the board is thinking about these conversations and looking at ways to stay engaged and supportive of affordability work as well. And Bill, can I put you on the spot? Is there anything else that you'd like to add or reflect as our board liaison?
Thanks, Sarah. This issue did get a lot of attention at our board retreat. This is the first in-person retreat we've had in several years. And we were taking a look at not only what we should be focusing on, but how we should be working on these issues. So affordability rose to the top, one of the top 2 or 3 issues that we wanted to address. And we felt we wanted to take a more active role in trying to find ways to improve affordability, to address the affordability crisis for consumers, for patients, and for large and small employers. So more to come on this as we develop our plans, but this cost growth target program is an essential element of that. And we would like the role of the advisory committee to become stronger, if you will, in the sense of trying to be more help identify proactively what could and should be done to improve affordability for our state's residents.
Thanks, Bill. Any questions or comments about the board and the board retreat and priorities? Okay, next slide, please. Also wanted to let folks know that last week was legislative days where the interim committees were in session and heard a number of informational hearings on topics. And there was an informational hearing at the House Committee on Behavioral Health and Healthcare last Monday on the cost growth target program and financial penalty development and sort of the status of the program, as well as concerns that have been raised about accountability and financial penalties in particular. So Felisa and I were panelists representing the committee and the program work. Other panelists include America's Health Insurance Plans, the Hospital Association, and Oregon Business and Industry. And I'm realizing that we might have skipped Katie in introductions. I'm not seeing her online. Katie, just making sure. Nope, okay.
I didn't see her, but I see Melissa now. Melissa, we just did a quick introduction of your name and if you have a pet.
Hi, my name is Melissa Dom. I'm the CFO for Providence for the delivery system here in Oregon. And I'm sorry, Felisa, I didn't hear what the other piece was.
Oh, if you have a pet.
I have 2 cats, Lucy and Eddie, and they love and hate each other at the same time.
Okay, so just wanted to let all the committee know that this presentation happened, this informational hearing happened. The recording and the materials are available, as well as written testimony that panelists submitted, and that's all logged in the legislative information system, link on the slide. Lisa, anything you'd like to add about legislative days or any questions from anybody? Okay, let's keep going. Next slide. Also wanted to give everyone a status update on the 2023 data submission. So as part of the cost growth target program, every year we collect data, and that is what we use to measure cost growth performance relative to the target cost growth trends in the state. That data submission is due every September, and we are really happy to report that we have completed the data submission and validation for 2023 with all of our payers. So this is a staged process where we start with payers who submit the data, we do the validation with the payers. When the data is complete and validated, we create sort of the official statewide file, and then we can move ahead and identify which provider organizations are included in this year's cycle based on attributed members, attributed lives. So we're getting ready to reach out to provider organizations and begin the provider stage of the validation, but we're really delighted because we have 18 parent organizations representing 36 plans who submit data, and that's a lot to manage, and we have been making process improvements and shortening that data submission and validation process every year. This is our third time going through this, and we were done in 2 months, and we're really excited about that because that means that the data will be more available sooner. We'll be able to inform conversations in the public hearing sooner, and move forward with provider conversations as well. So if you're a provider, stay tuned. We're going to be reaching out to you by the end of the month to let you know where you stand, if you're in or out this year. And payers, thank you. Really thank you for great work on the data files and a really smooth process this year. One other thing to note here, we have delayed accountability. So remember way back in January, this committee talked about the timeline, and we agreed that performance improvement plans should be delayed by a year. So this data submission cycle that covers cost growth between 2021 and 2022, no payer or provider would be subject to a performance improvement plan for this measurement period. However, we are continuing to develop the process and the program. And so this year, part of that development is really separating out the data validation and making sure that we have good data and that we have faith in that data. But then that conversation to know whether or not cost growth exceeded the target for a good reason or not, which we've been calling determining reasonableness, which is clunky, need a better term maybe, but we are trying to do that in 2 separate processes this year. So if you are a payer and you need to have a determining reasonableness conversation, we've let you know that. And we have not yet scheduled those conversations because we're still talking to the committee today, developing the principles for the financial penalties, getting ready to move into rulemaking. So there is some final conversations that we want to have on the payer side about reasonableness, but we feel okay letting that time frame be squishy because no payers or providers would be put on a performance improvement plan this year as a result of those conversations. And we'll talk more about accountability in later today as well. Okay, I think those are my program updates.
Next slide, please. Yeah, we're just going to take a minute, and Sarah's going to walk us through some of the work that we did in 2023. And then I'm going to ask you to really identify lessons learned, changes that we need to make as we go into the 2024 that we can really adjust our agenda and our approach. You know, it's really important that this is just not something that we sign in for a couple hours of, you know, once a quarter. We really need to think about whether this committee is driving forward the work of cost growth at the legislative level. And I think this is our opportunity to think a little bit about that and kind of pat ourselves on the back as well for some of the good work that was done this year. Sarah, you want to walk us through those slides, and then I will be asking for some reflections and some discussion so that we can influence the work that we do in 2024.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, next slide, please. So back in January, again, we identified a couple of key activities for 2023. Those were the first time that we would publicly report payer and provider organization level cost growth trends. That was slated for the spring. We plan to hold a cost growth target public hearing, the first public hearing focused on payer and provider performance, also in the spring. We plan to start accountability rulemaking in the summer or fall. And we talked about identifying and selecting cost growth mitigation strategies. So some of you might remember back, I had pitched maybe we have a recommendations report by the end of the year. So that was what we talked about in January. Next. Things that we have accomplished. We put out 3 major reports this year. One was a refresh of the impacts of healthcare costs on people in Oregon with updated data, and that came out in the spring. And then we published 2 healthcare cost growth trends reports. One looking at the baseline period from 18 to 19 to 20, and that was at the state and the market level. And then our 2020 to 2021 report, which was the first time with the payer and provider organization performance publicly reported. We presented those reports in a variety of settings, including back to you all at committee meetings.
Yeah, Sarah, I just want to call out the quality of these reports. I thought they were really, really well done. It's a synthesis of an extraordinary amount of data. For new committee members or existing committee members that haven't picked them up, take a moment and leaf through them, understand that this is what the public will see. This is what the legislature will see as they assess the work that we're doing here.
Thanks, Peter, and credit to the whole team working on this. There's a team of validators and report producers, and could not have pulled all of this off without them. Next. So this year we held not one but 2 public hearings based on some committee discussion. You all thought that it would be really smart to divide the conversation up. And so we did that. And in May, we had our first public hearing that was really focused on presenting the data. So that data from that 2020-21 report, looking at cost growth at the state, the market, the payer and provider level, and talking about what some of the cost growth trends were from the data. Then in September, we held our second public hearing that was focused on perspectives from health plans and provider organizations about their costs, sort of what cost growth looked like on the ground for them in that period, as well as questions about what actions they're taking and discussion about their plans for addressing cost growth in the future. So we had a really tightly packed agenda in that second public hearing. We had 4 panels of payers and providers. Thank you for all of you who participated or were panelists for us. I think there were some really great conversations that came out of that hearing, and I think it was a lot of work to pull off 2 public hearings, but I think it was a really nice way to stage the conversation and keep the conversation going publicly. We also had really excellent public comment, particularly in September. We put out a very broad call for public comment. Many of you helped boost that through your channels and your networks. Thank you. And we received more than 100 public comments in various formats, email, social media, written testimony as well. So we posted those online, and there's some really powerful consumer stories, some really powerful employer stories about folks struggling with healthcare costs and affordability. So also thank you to everyone who shared their story with us to inform this work and participated in the public hearings. Okay, and next. Accountability rulemaking. So we did not do that in 2023, not met. But this was a deliberate decision to delay the rulemaking until 2024 so that we could have more time to have that discussion with you as the advisory committee, with our technical advisory group, with other stakeholders, with the legislature. So that was a deliberate decision to push that out, and we plan to start rulemaking in early 2024. Before the end of the month, probably the week after Thanksgiving, we will announce our Rules Advisory Committee recruitment. So planning on large public engagement there, and we're going to start that in November. So we have time to make sure folks know that this is happening and get all of that teed up to convene the Rules Advisory Committee in January. So that's the plan. Didn't do it in 2023, but feel pretty good about where we are in the plan for 2024. Next. Okay. Peter, do you want to back to you to summarize, or do you want me to keep going?
Oh, I can summarize a few things here. You've touched on this. January, we really thought about the performance improvement plan. Timelines, we pushed that out. We launched the cost and equity work group, really important. And we started to talk about affordability of drugs. I think we just were scratching the surface there about how do you translate the recognition that inflation on the cost trend on the drug side outpaces the cost trends that we've set for the overall program, and how do we start to get our hands around it. We continued some of that work into March and started planning on the May public hearing, as well as reviewing some of those reports that Sarah talked about. And then there was the public hearing. We learned a lot from that, started planning immediately the September follow-up to the public hearing, and really started to think about where value-based payment compact comes in, and how and if that work really drives the cost trend. And if so, how do we provide some framework around that work so that the legislature really understands the opportunities there. We discussed accountability measures and just started having that discussion around PIPs and those various really critical work around the philosophy of financial penalties. And we'll pick some of that work up later today. And then we did the public hearing at the end of Q3, reviewed the cost and equity work group draft recommendations, and continued our discussion around the value-based payment compact. So that's sort of the key work that we got done. And next slide, please. Sarah, anything to add there before I pose some questions? So, as I think about this work, I want to understand your view from whatever perspective you bring to the table about how we're actually driving towards the state's very, very difficult goal in the current economic environment of mitigating the inflation trend on healthcare costs. And, we've sort of used 23 to frame the issues, to frame some of the process and to start the reports. But I don't know that we've gotten to the piece of really helping the industry think about how we're going to mitigate those costs overall as a state. And so what I'd like to ask you is, were we productive? What do we need to think about changing as we go into an agenda for 2024, which we're going to talk about next? How do you find your engagement in this work? And what would you like to see that we as a committee are doing different that would add more value to your ability to impact the long-term trends that are so important to the state? So I'm going to open the floor up. And I certainly would be pleased to call people out if you don't want to volunteer. Andrew, what are your thoughts this morning?
Happy to help start the conversation, Peter. So were we productive? I think yes, very much. And someone just said it in the comments. It was really good to see kind of that highlight of things we've talked about. I'm always amazed and about what we're able to dig into at our meetings and what we've been able to discuss for the year. So yes, I think we've been productive. As for things to focus on or how we've done, I think overall I'd say, there's not going to be any one single answer or one single approach to how we help control cost growth. So continuing to focus on all of these different measures is going to be key in what we do. That said, I really appreciate the committee hearing the Prescription Drug Affordability Board's recommendations and focusing on prescription drug costs. You know, of all the cost growth impacts, prescription drug costs continue and will continue to be some of the largest drivers. So focusing on that aspect will be important. And I see that's on the agenda for next year as well to dive into that. And then just overall, you know, transparency is going to be so key and important. And that's one of the greatest accomplishments of this work. It's a really complex system, and there's systems within it that are very complex. Policymakers need to understand all of the different aspects of that so that they can decide where to focus continued attention and policy changes. So I really think, you know, there was a lot of work yet to do, but that focus, our focus on transparency, is probably one of the greatest accomplishments that this group is going to have. Thanks.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in here as well. I agree with Commissioner Stolpe. We've done a lot, even having this conversation, bringing this group together. It's the right focus, but there is no one answer. It has to be a lot of different pieces. And I think a lot of the different companies and organizations and people involved all have positive intent. And I think there was an article that was published yesterday in Modern Healthcare of why can't we reduce waste? Why is it this way? And all of the hurdles that we face to do it. So I think continuing to focus on where the highest costs are and what's driving that, bringing that together with mental health and behavioral health, social determinants of health, not just medical care. Looking at pharmacy, there's a ton of new drugs coming out, which is wonderful in how they help, but they also are really high cost, right? So there's a lot of different places, and I think we need to look at all of those, and then also look internal to our organizations and see what we can do better. But for this group, I think looking at all these drivers and what's coming out and what's coming down the road is where we're going to need to focus. So maybe to just be very, very specific, I think looking at the highest areas of spend that have the highest potential avoidable care or healthcare is probably where we need to look first.
Thanks, Jessica. I really agree with you. I think we have some extraordinary challenges out there, new technologies, new pharmaceuticals, as well as some inflationary costs, and to be able to identify those top leading places where we can have an impact, I think would be really good work for the committee. Other thoughts? Lisa.
Yeah, I think really good discussion and some thoughts on this. One of the things that I don't have a lot of transparency on in my role is kind of the transactional pieces that take money away from direct kind of patient care, costs, and I know we're talking a lot about medical expense, but there are, along the lines of pharmaceuticals, PBMs, there are groups and services that have popped up in between paying for healthcare and cost going, and how that the transactional component where people are making quite a bit of money, and we've seen this kind of grow over the course of the last decade in particular. And so I just wonder how we think about how we understand those costs that aren't necessarily directly related to providing medical care, but are overall a large part of the growth of the spend for healthcare, if that makes sense. So I think that's a piece that would be interesting to think about how we kind of focus and start to tackle and understand that. I mean, just from a learning standpoint, those pieces that are kind of services, but aren't actually maybe directly providing medical care to patients.
Yeah, Melissa, I really, really appreciate those thoughts. You know, as we think about this work is not about how do we restrict the services we make available within our communities. I think a lot about both, is there revenue available on a federal basis that we can bring into the state to better care for our colleagues and communities? And I also think very much about, are there companies like you mentioned that are inserting themselves as middlemen into this transaction that aren't necessarily spending that profitability back into the state for the benefit of our members? And if so, how do we identify them, and how do we think about their role and maybe other ways to do that work? Lawrence, I noted that you had a comment in the chat, but I didn't pull it up. You want to just mention it?
Sure. No, it was just a note that I think the committee's done a great job on highlighting the cost of healthcare to individuals in the state of Oregon, its employers, particularly small employers, and the equity impacts of that. At the same time, I think we've also highlighted on the sort of other end of the chain, if you will, the cost to providers of the inflationary environment in terms of paying appropriate wages to nurses and other frontline staff, as well as high cost drugs. You know, how to link these two in a practical way, I think would be a topic that I'm interested in for FY24.
Yeah, you know, Lawrence, I have a lot of concern that the work we do is still a little isolated from the work that gets done in treating patients or in providing health plans across those broader organizations. And I think some of the work we need to think about is that messaging and maybe a bit more of a campaign about how do we bring more folks from our organizations into this discussion to really help us be successful. Gil, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think that, you know, this has been really important work in framing the issue and really having something for us to use as a bit of a roadmap going forward, recognizing a really difficult time coming out of pandemic with rising costs and everything, but still a couple of things that I'm kind of focused on. One, the value-based pay compact work group and just the better data that we have available to providers now to recognize the total cost of care of our members and look at areas where maybe there are opportunities for better coordination, better driving down costs, addressing social determinants. You know, we're coming into a new era with the waiver and with different things to try to address housing and energy and different things. So really looking at how to lower that cost, broadly speaking, and seeing how do we actually measure some of those that are maybe impacting consumers or patients, you know, that are now being included in sort of the medical costs equation, if you will, through social determinants. So really interested in that and the equity issues that the committee started to tackle also this year.
Really appreciate your focus on the consumer. You know, I think it's important as we think about this work to think about what costs the consumer is bearing, especially as we have shifts out of the Medicaid program due to redetermination, and where do those folks land, and what's the extra burden that they pick up. So thank you for those thoughts. And any last thoughts before we move on?
This is Nick, if I may.
Please.
I want to kind of tag on with the employer perspective just a little bit more. I've heard some of it mentioned, and certainly we want to make sure consumers have affordable care. I know employers are also facing majorly increased costs, which will cause us to have to cut benefits or raise prices or the combination. And I think it's just a really important piece to keep in mind that, you know, a lot of people get their insurance through their employer, and those benefits are eroding as the costs go up. So we have to work really hard to figure out how to stem the tide of cost increases there.
Yeah, Nick, I think it's a really important piece to think about in our future reporting. How do we create some consistency around metrics to think about employers and to think about consumers? You know, there's a lot of future shifting of costs, and I think we need to count all of that. Obviously, that's part of the core legislation to think about the total cost of healthcare. It's a little harder to get your hands around some of those components than maybe what the provider or health plan cost structure is. That's a little easier to document. So we should think about how we report out and how we create some consistency in that reporting out, so we can understand whether one sector is bearing more of the impact of cost increases than others. Teresa, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, this has been a great year for laying the groundwork for this work. Really appreciate all that Sarah's team has done to bring us the information that's needed. And as I reflect on folks' comments, one thing that really stands out for me is where the costs are increasing aren't always where the I guess the problem lies. Or, you know, why are the costs increasing is really important to understand. I think about behavioral health and mental health and the rising needs in that space, and how that's driving a lot of costs in other areas, and the social determinants of health. Several have already commented on these, and just really, you know, peeling back some of why are some of the costs increasing in different areas. So just highlighting how that's an important part of really digging into some of this work. So.
And Elisa.
I think that if I were to, one of the things I appreciated about the panels in the public hearings was, I think it has a lot of potential to be a sort of more collaborative learning environment on the where and what people are doing about the where. And so I would be interested in moving forward about how we set up more of those sort of collaborative learning environments. I think we can spend our time spinning our wheels on what do we do about PBMs, but if there was a shared and joint strategy around what everybody was going to do about PBMs, and that was a collective, I think that could actually drive some change in the market or the industry. And so I don't know, and there's lots of, I think, opportunities where the state can provide some of those collaboration protections and allow people to drive those changes. So we should consider those learning environments.
Great. Any other comments before we move on? Thanks, really appreciate that. And let's think about this next piece, which is Sarah's going to walk us through 2024 committee planning, and think about what's missing based on what you've heard here, and also just what else you think you might want to add into the work. Sarah, back to you.
Okay, next slide. And one more. So just to summarize some of the previous decisions and the plan for next year. This year, we've been meeting every other month. We've been having 3-hour virtual meetings, and we replaced the May meeting with the public hearing. Based on our conversation in September, we agreed that we were moving to monthly meetings in 2024 and that those would be shorter. So we're thinking most of them will be 90 minutes, a couple might be longer. There was a request to do one in-person meeting, and that in-person meeting would be a little bit longer to make time for some of the relationship building and coordination. But the rest of the meetings would continue to be virtual. So we are starting to figure out how to do that. Next slide. We polled most of you, granted not the new committee members, so need to follow up with you on that, but we polled most of you about your availability for a new standing meeting series that would be monthly. We have sent out calendar holds for the top 2 options. We had an equal amount of people who said they were available or not available for these 2. So today is kind of your last chance to weigh in and think about calendars. I know scheduling this committee and coming to this committee meeting has been a significant time commitment for many of you, and it's been challenging. And I think we really want to try to find the schedule that works for the most people, so that we can continue to have full committees and really robust discussion in 2024. So the 2 meeting options are meeting on the 4th Monday of the month from 1 to 2:30 p.m. or meeting on the 4th Tuesday of the month from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Any immediate, absolutely not. If anyone didn't respond to the poll and would like to weigh in on one of these now, new committee members, if you want to check your calendars, I will also follow up with you offline about this, but my goal would be that this afternoon we will pin this down and send out final calendar holds for 2024. I'm seeing 1 vote in the chat for Tuesday. Thanks, Kate. Charlie's available for either. Excellent. Melissa, Tuesday. Tuesday. Okay. Okay, great. I see only votes for Tuesday. We will finalize for Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. I know it's hard to do real-time scheduling and really appreciate that. Okay, next piece of housekeeping is the in-person session. So a couple of things here. In 2023, we actually replaced one of the committee meetings with the cost growth target public hearing. We held the public hearing during the cost growth committee time, which was great because it meant you could all come to the public hearing, but it meant that we lost a committee meeting and we essentially went 4 months in between sort of our regular discussion. We would like to propose as staff not doing that again in 2024. We would hold the public hearing in addition to the regularly scheduled committee meeting. One of the things that we talked about in September was, should the in-person meeting, the longer meeting, also be the public hearing? After putting together sort of the notes on the work plan and all the things that you said you wanted to talk about in 2024, we are also recommending that that is not what we do, and that the public hearing would be also separate. So the in-person meeting will be a committee meeting. We'll have a committee agenda. It'll be focused on some discussion. I think, as Felisa was just saying about that collaborative learning environment, the in-person half-day session could be an opportunity for some panels, bringing in some other folks to have conversations with us as the committee. So we are proposing doing that in June, at the end of June, and our proposed location is in Wilsonville. I know for some people coming into Portland is tricky, but Wilsonville hopefully is a little bit more convenient and there is available parking. Any major concerns with that? I know June 25th might not work for everybody, but again, didn't hear responses from everybody on the poll. We will also, have a virtual call-in option on the 25th. So if you're not able to come in person, that would be ideal, but we would have an option for virtual participation on the 25th as well. Felisa.
So just to clarify, Sarah, would we do our meeting and the in-person public hearing the same day or 2 different days?
I think based on the current schedule, we would likely do a public hearing in May when the report comes out. So we'd have a May committee meeting. There would be a public hearing also happening in May, and then there would be the June in-person half day as the June committee meeting. So 3 meetings over May and June total.
Got you. Thank you for the clarification.
Is the public hearing in person?
We have not yet decided that. I think when we come back to you all and start planning for that, we can talk about it. My preference today, if I had to pick, would be no. I think we get better participation virtually. We can get people calling in from all over the state and don't have to deal with sort of travel time and logistics. So my preference would be no, but that's still open question. Okay. All right, we're gonna move forward on this, and granted, this could change. We might decide we don't want to do this or we want to do it differently, but tentatively, I think these are the calendar holds we're gonna send out. Okay, so what are our topics for 2024? So a couple things that we heard and that we went back and sifted through in putting this together. One was with shorter meetings, each meeting would be dedicated to one primary topic, so that we would really have time to be able to talk about it, hear from different presenters if needed, other experts. We would not be trying to pack those 90-minute meetings with a lot of agenda items. So then we went back through all of our previous discussion and pulled out all of the things that you all had mentioned as, oh, it would be great to talk about this, or I'd like to spend more time talking about this. And that's how we created this list of one topic per meeting. I think Peter's going to ask you, in a few minutes, if these are the right topics, if we missed anything, if these should be in a different order. All of that is going to be up in the air, but here is the tentative schedule. In January, we would hear a presentation from the Prescription Drug Affordability Board and the Prescription Drug Price Transparency Programs about their annual reports and recommendations. Those are coming out in December. We're not having a December meeting, so January is the next step for us. That would let us dig back into our conversations about pharmacy costs, PBM costs, all of that. In January this year, this last time, the advisory committee endorsed the Prescription Drug Affordability Board recommendations. Don't know if we want to do that again in January, but that would be part of the conversation, and we'd hear presentations from both programs. In February, we would start the first of several deeper dive conversations into cost drivers. This is something that several of you expressed interest in September, that we really need to hear and think about the cost drivers at different levels. And we really need to identify them and understand what the possible opportunities are to address those cost drivers. So you'll see throughout this work plan, we've broken those up into sections. Thinking February would be focused on pharmacy because that would just continue the conversation from January. In March, the cost driver conversation will be focused on state and federal legislation, state and federal actions. So some of you brought up things like state benefit mandates drive costs. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's happening federally and what its impact is and how that shows up in our total cost of care measurement. So all of that would be part of the March conversation. In April, the cost and equity work group would come back with a revised framework. If you remember when we talked to you about those recommendations on that draft framework last time, there were a whole bunch of follow-up requests. So go talk to this committee and these people and incorporate their recommendations. So this gives that work group a few months to do that and to incorporate all of that conversation and come back with a revised framework. In May, we would have the annual cost growth trends report. So this would be reporting out on our next year of data at the state, market, payer, and provider level. In June, this would be our in-person meeting potentially. Oh, sorry, Felicia, go ahead.
Sarah, I have a question. Is that on that annual cost growth target trends report, that will include the look back on the quality too?
Maybe. I think.
Okay.
Maybe. I think there's still some questions about what we're doing around quality and
Okay.
what we're pulling in.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, in June, we would have more time. So thinking that this could be the cost driver conversation about from the payer and provider organization perspective, which again, some of you brought up last in our September meeting, but then this could also potentially be focused more on some of that learning collaborative shared learning space to actually start talking about tools for payers and providers and strategies and specific things, specific sharing, specific lists. There are a couple of resource guides in development, including specific list of strategies for provider organizations to address costs. This meeting could be a chance to dig into all of that. In July, we would
Hey,
come
Sarah,
back.
for
Yeah, go
for
ahead,
that
Jessica.
June meeting, so I saw that as I was reading through this. Do you think there'll be enough time there to have both payers, providers talk about their drivers and also talk about the tools? It seems like all of that could be really dense. So I just a question. I just want to make sure we give enough time to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the feedback we want to hear about this work plan. So let me finish running through the list. And then definitely, if you think we need more time or need to adjust this in any way, very open to that. So July would be our regularly scheduled, I guess, annual check-in on the value-based payment compact and the work group and how all of that work is progressing and conversations about value-based payment adoption. August, tentatively slated, there was a request a few months ago for a presentation about how health insurance rate review works and the relationship between health insurance rate review and the cost growth target. So what are we measuring differently? How do those two intersect and play off of each other? Andrew, hopefully not too much of a surprise, but we're thinking maybe August for that conversation. And then September, October, November, December are a little bit of a placeholder. So there is some room to wiggle around, but again, thinking that maybe the 2024 work is really starting to come to recommendations. Are there recommendations that the committee can come to for payers and providers? These are recommended strategies. We think as a state, we should have collective impact, all working on PBMs or whatever that is. So are there things for payers and providers? Are there recommendations for state action? What those could be legislative action, that could be back to the agencies, to OHA, to DCBS. And I think this conversation is really open and really messy, potentially, depending on what we learn in all of the previous months, looking that closer look at all those cost drivers. So left November and December as placeholders to continue that conversation and finalize those recommendations. But like I said, this is very tentative. Would love to hear what you think and what, if anything, we should adjust and what, if anything, we missed.
Melissa, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, when we hear testimony from the community and from individuals, it's often around their out-of-pocket portion. And I don't know that we've had a great discussion understanding what those out-of-pocket and deductible trends are. And so that just maybe, I mean, that's kind of number one when I'm hearing kind of community members talk about the burden of the cost. A lot of that has to do with the design of the plan. And I think there's been trends and changes over the course of the last decade or so. So that just feels like a learning opportunity for all of us to understand that better.
Yeah, thanks for that. I should let you know that our team is working on a report that does a really deep dive into patient paid amounts over the last almost decade. And so we look at deductibles, co-pays. I think we also have other information about out-of-pocket costs from other data sources, and we can put all that together. So we are thinking about a report, working towards that end of this year, sometime next year. I don't know if we want to dedicate committee time and conversation to that. We can, but just letting you know that we'll also be publishing that soon-ish.
Sarah, to follow up on the prior discussion, do we have any way to track the employer cost side of that as well, not just the out-of-pocket cost for consumers?
We do include some data on employer costs in our impacts report. We can look at the amounts for commercial employer-sponsored health insurance. So how much the employer share of premiums is increasing as a percentage that the employer pays versus the employee. We can look at that. We have data from our friends at DCBS about what's happening with premiums in Oregon for certain parts of the market. I don't know that we have data at sort of the sector level, like, you know, is business versus manufacturing versus healthcare. We could look into that a little bit more. I don't know that there's a ton of granularity there, but we definitely have state level data on employer share of premiums and how that dynamic between what the employer's paying and what the employee pays changes over time.
And maybe some of the August meeting can reflect that around rate review, changes in plan benefits, and we can extrapolate from there initially, take a look at the kind of reports that we do have and then think about if we need something different for the following year.
For the cost drivers conversation in June, I think is a really important topic to give payer and providers a chance to talk about it. And so my thought was, what if we move the tools for payers and providers to go with just reading the September one, recommendations for payers and providers to meet the target. I think it could go well with that conversation.
Okay, so then all of June would be focused on payer and provider cost driver discussion, and that makes sense. And reminder that the June meeting is longer. It's twice as long as the rest of the meetings because it's the in-person.
Folks can push back on it, but I think those two topics are going to be pretty robust. But others, please weigh in.
One other option that I kind of hesitate to put out there, but I'm going to do it anyway, is we had talked about doing essentially, it's something the policy board has been doing a lot the last couple of years, which is a sort of an optional educational webinar. So outside of their meeting schedule, they hold an educational webinar and it's on specific topics that the board is interested in. It's recorded, it's a public meeting, board members can join, public can join. And it's often a chance to sort of present information and dig deeper or ask questions about it. So that could be an opportunity to present a report, or it could be an opportunity to have more of an educational, like, let's learn about how PBMs work. We could do that in addition to some of these committee meetings. If some of these topics are more sort of educational or more about we need to get some grounding in this before we have a discussion, I think we could explore that. I recognize that that would mean potentially asking you to come to other meetings. That could be optional. We could do that as a webinar and then you could listen on your own time, or if you feel like you know all about PBMs or whatever the topic is, you don't need to do that. We would certainly hold all of the committee discussion and any committee decisions to the actual committee meeting schedule, but that could be another way to cover some of the content that you're interested in.
Well, Lisa.
I'm wondering, Sarah, if we can just do those in combination with the other boards. So if the health policy board is doing one already, or if the pharmacy board is doing one, then we can sort of just get that list out to us.
Yeah, we can definitely cross-share the list. I'd want to go back and talk to we have an internal group of all the folks who staff committees and the boards. And we can talk about maybe a shared calendar. I like that. I don't know what's on their list. And, Bill, I don't know if the board has identified its priorities for educational webinars and if those might line up, but we can definitely share what's scheduled as it comes out.
Yeah, we haven't set, this is Bill Kramer from the Health Policy Board. We haven't set specific dates for any of these educational webinars, but we do think that'd be an important element that might complement the work the Cost Growth Target Committee Advisory Committee is doing. So we'll work with Sarah and the co-chairs here to make sure we coordinate, and so that we line up both the topics and the timing with the work that the advisory committee is doing.
And then I think it would be good if I know Andrew's on this call, like I think if DCBS is doing some on rate, I know that you do one for consumers on rate review. I've been to one, or at least you did do one at some point. Like those would be good to add into.
Teresa, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add, going back to the discussion of the June meeting, I agree that's a lot of material and a really important topic. And the fact that it's twice as long, maybe that actually addresses that concern. But I agree that that's an important one, and awesome that it's going to be an in-person one. So
good, Jessica.
I know that the Senate Healthcare Committee has had some recent hearings on consolidation in the healthcare space. If we maybe could invite somebody to come and share that work and findings here, or have a discussion on it. I know it's been pretty public, some of the conversations recently.
I think I would be happy to send out a follow-up email. The presentations for both September and November legislative days at Senate Healthcare about consolidation, private equity, what the impact is on cost, what the evidence says. If folks haven't heard that, I've been calling it just this health policy masterclass. Both of those presentations are phenomenal. And I really recommend the recording. So we can send those out if you want to check that out. If folks want to, look at what's already there, that would be great. And then we could talk about potentially inviting speakers back for a conversation with us. But I think the recording of the testimony is fantastic.
Jessica, I agree. I think that there's some real importance within that whole area. Sarah, that'd be great if you'd send that information out, and then we as a committee can decide whether there's anything we want to take up or it's just a learning opportunity. Anything else that folks want to comment? Once this gets locked in stone, then Sarah and her team do a ton of work on it. So now's the time to throw in your requests if you have them. That's great. Oh, here, Dish.
Yeah, my only feedback would be the same thing around, the June meeting, which is really identifying the cost drivers. It's a huge piece of work, right? I mean, that cost drivers, understanding the cost drivers would drive into recommendations on how to improve the cost structure in the future. My only feedback would be that, having done this work for a long time, it might make sense that you reserve 3 meetings for recommendation, that you would shorten that down to 1 meeting and develop recommendations as you are throughout the year. Can capture those recommendations as you understand what the cost drivers are. Let's work at the same time to develop what a proposed recommendation would look like and capture those throughout the year versus, doing what we do is identifying the cost drivers, and at the end of the year, we don't really remember what we did throughout the year. Might as well just capture our recommendations as we go through this, and then leave the November to summarize what recommendations we've captured and start, focusing on those. That's the only feedback I would have, because it's a lot of work understanding a cost driver. And I don't think 4 hours, even though it sounds 4 hours, but it could go very fast with just identifying the cost drivers. But I would say develop recommendations as you do this work so we can capture them throughout the year.
That's a great point, Hardesh. And I want to add, I think the May presentation and discussion around the annual cost growth report, that report will identify a lot of cost drivers and trends that we're seeing statewide. So that might be a start of that conversation before we get into the payer and provider specific content. But I think what I'm hearing is that we should shift everything from July down a month so that we have the June conversation about cost drivers. The July conversation is a continuation of the cost drivers and starting to get into recommendations. August becomes value-based payment. September becomes rate review, or maybe not. But I think what I'm hearing loud and clear is that we need more time for the payer provider conversation, both cost drivers and strategies and recommendations.
I think that makes pretty good sense. Charlie?
Yeah, I'm not sure if these are, additions to these topics or just more granular things that I would like to have discussed at some point. So, but wanted to say them now so that I don't miss my opportunity. Well, first of all, I think I would agree, with Jessica about the consolidation presentations in front of Senate Health. Thought that was really interesting, and just having a conversation about, what do we do in a already somewhat consolidated market for cost would be a good conversation. And then maybe maybe these are under like recommendations for state action. I know other states like Colorado have looked at empowering the insurance commissioner to actually look at negotiated rates between payer and providers in the context of kind of like a premium affordability goal to bring down costs for consumers and underlying cost of care. And then I think I remember hearing that OHA was already beginning a study into facility fees. And I think that's another topic that we would be interested in kind of bringing to this forum. So those are just a couple of things that are that we're interested in, that would definitely like to see discussed at some point.
Great, thanks for your thoughts, Charlie. Greg, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think maybe this is in the same vein as what Charlie was just saying, but I think as we're talking about cost drivers, really, and how to implement strategies and come up with strategies to address those drivers, I think keeping in mind that the work that other states and perhaps other countries have done to try to address these things, and not necessarily view ourselves as having to come up with solutions just on our own, just to, I don't know, if to the extent possible, those conversations could bring in information about strategies that appear to be effective elsewhere in the country and in the world that we might be able to some degree mirror here. I think that would be useful.
I agree. I think we need all the information we can get. I also think some about the circular nature of these costs within the state. And as we talked about, then the costs that are coming from outside the state. So as providers have internal price costs that transfer to plans that then generate more cost for the health insurance for those providers. You know, there's this sort of captured piece within the state. And then there's costs that we can influence outside of the state. And I think we'll try to keep that going. I do very much like the idea of sort of at each meeting capturing some of the cost drivers in a fairly formal way. And that way we can get ourselves better prepared for the June meeting coming up, Sarah. Anything else that anybody'd like to add to this agenda? Gil?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily to add, but you know, another meeting but just in terms of background, sort of a macro economic kind of analysis of how you know our healthcare costs fit within the general economy. You know, because healthcare costs, of course, are, impacted, or we've just seen, the inflation and, supply costs and everything, and just kind of getting a view maybe outside of healthcare specifically, but just to sort of lay some context for what we're seeing. Might be helpful, and maybe that's just guiding us to a report. Maybe that is from a statewide perspective, to just help ground our discussions, in this.
Great, thanks a lot, Gil. Any other comments before we move on? Really appreciate you taking the time to think through 23 and what we want to accomplish in 24. If you have any further thoughts, shoot Sarah a note. Shoot me a note. We'll go from there.
Great,
Lisa,
thank
back
you.
to you.
Great. I think we're gonna kick on. Do we need a break, Sarah, or should we just power through? Great. Okay. Let's next slide, moving on to sort of accountability and development. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay. So I think that just want to outline that the goals of this section is to talk about, to continue our conversations from September about financial penalties. And I am not sure if people had a chance to go back and watch the legislative hearing in House healthcare. I think that that is a helpful discussion too. So I want to remind people that we're moving into the financial penalty discussion, and that this is really about helping provide OHA with a structure in the upcoming rulemaking and adopting sort of some principles to guide the financial penalty development. And I think, you know, we've had a lot of input on what this looks like. And so I appreciate people sort of giving that input, not only on these calls, but also I think folks have submitted, Jenny has submitted some written input and that's some other things as we head into this discussion. So I just want to remind people of where we're at. So I think all of that's on the slide, right? We start with transparency. We're in that transparency phase now. That then we move into performance improvement plans. And then after that, 3 out of 5 years, so it's a long span of time, payers and providers exceed the cost growth target with statistical certainty and without good reason. You have to have both of those things, not just one, both of those things. So go ahead to the next slide. Okay, here's the list of good reasons. There are lots of good reasons. So I think, and I feel like often on these calls, we talk about some of these good reasons and how we're going to try to mitigate for many of these good reasons. But the reality is we can't mitigate for all of these reasons. So changes in federal and state law. I spend most of my life trying to do those things and they're real hard. So I feel like those are good reasons. And none of us on this call have control over that. Changes in mandated benefits, none of us have control over that. New pharmaceutical treatments, no payer provider has control over that. No payer provider has control over taxes or any other administrative costs. Nobody has control over acts of God. Many of us wish we did. Some of us think we do, but nobody really does. I think investments to improve population health and equity, right? This goes to the quality conversation, right? We're not trying to drive macroeconomic factors, i.e., I think the big topic of inflation that we've been batting about here, and frontline worker costs. So also the cost of staff. So all of the things that I think we talk about, how do we sort of have discussions about? And I think as we move along, and you'll see in the work plan coming up, some of these things we're going to discuss and try to mitigate, right? Just because it's the right thing for us to be engaged in. But there's a full recognition in the accountability process that even if we attempt to mitigate these, we may not have control over them, right? Go ahead and go to the next slide. I want to remind people about the timeline that we're in. So Sarah put this nice little "we're here" in the slides. So surprise, we're in 2020. Oh, we're in 2022, 2023, but we're really here. So we adjusted the timeline. So PIPs are going to start kicking off soon. And the health authority is working on an outline for those and collecting feedback on those. And that's happening now. And then the financial penalties wouldn't apply until 2025, really, because you would have to be on a PIP for several, still exceed your cost growth target, still be outside of, still be outside the cost growth target, be on a performance improvement plan, and then still be ignoring your performance improvement plan to get to a financial penalty. I think that that's a really important point, and be exceeding it not based on those good reasons. So I really want to remind people about sort of the level of flagrancy that you would need to have to get to financial penalties. So go ahead to the next slide. So I think that this is just a reminder about the discussion we had in September. I think that the health authority put out some different options. I feel like, then what happened is I think that there's a real balance and attention here, right? Between making sure that there's clarity on what's coming up, but not sending people into like a paranoid spin out. And I think we may not have hit that balance, but that's what it is. So we're here right now, and I don't think we could prevent that is the reality, because people don't, no one likes to sort of think everyone, I think in a job, I'm going to be frank, I feel like insurance and providers oftentimes live in a state of crisis, because that's what you deal with. That's like, you're literally a system that is designed to help people in crisis. And so then I think the worst case scenario in crisis sort of is part of that thinking. And so I do think a lot about this is people ran those numbers, they got freaked out. There's a lot of things. So what we came back to is we decided that we would have a set of principles around the direction that we're giving to the health authority in their rulemaking. So I think if folks recall, we have the speeding ticket analogy, right? Your first is the warning, you get on a performance improvement plan, then you're going to get a ticket, and it's sort of escalating. And we have lots of examples of that type of behavior in our many government systems, actually. Go ahead and head to the next slide. Okay. So if we thought of our discussion in September as like, we want to achieve compliance, we really want to get organizations' attention, especially after, this is beyond PIPs, I want to remind people. And, how can we sort of use this as sort of transformation across the board? So they should start small and ramp up over time, or be significant enough to change behavior. So here's sort of the draft principles. So corrective guidance prior to penalties. Oh, and Sarah put the principles document in the chat. And equity, right? So that we are really looking at, the differences in size, the differences across the payers, transparency, so that it's very clear and open, and an appeal and adjustment mechanism. Okay, so if people can open up the link that Sarah sent in the chat, or open up the
Felisa, we have the text of each principle on the next slides as well.
Oh, great. Okay, so I guess you don't have to open up the link. I'm obviously not going to read this for you all. I think that there was some, sorry, I want to just, so the corrective guidance, this is the PIP. Please, is there any, I'm going to actually go through these, and then let's open it up for discussion at the end. So let's go on to the next slide. This is equity. Let's move on to the next slide. Transparency, let's move on. I feel like we're reading in real time, but okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay. Head us into the discussion questions. Next slide. Sarah, can you paste these discussion questions into the chat? Do you mind?
Yep, just a second.
Maybe I can do it. No, I can't do
Got
it.
it. I got it. Give me a second.
Okay. Okay, so Johnny, can we take down the slides so we can see each other? Thank you. Okay, so I want to just kick it off with a little bit of having a discussion about these. And so I do want to say that I think I want to be clear, we're not having a discussion if there are financial penalties or not. That has been decided by the legislation, so those are going to happen. I think really this is a discussion about, do these draft principles reflect the committee conversation from September and the intent? And are there principles that we should add? So I'm going to open it up right now and sort of see, do these capture some of the principles that we discussed in September? And I know some of the new people on are just sort of staring because they weren't here in September. So I want to recognize that. Jessica.
I'll go first. I know I sent out some thoughts for the group, and we'll get into them as we get to each section. I know we're talking about the principles. So largely I thought it was a good document and really appreciated the clarity on how the PIPs and penalties relate. One piece I thought maybe we add to the transparency is predictability. So going towards things like reasonable upper limits, don't want to cause like market disruption. So I thought maybe either in the equity section or the transparency section, have a little bit more around that piece. You mentioned in healthcare, we seem to be in crisis mode. So predictability is really important in insurance managing risk. So that's where that thought comes from.
Can I ask a question about that sort of predictability? Can you say a little bit more about that? Because when I hear predictability on a financial penalty, it's a weird sort of concept for me, because then it's like, are you predicting that you're going to get a financial penalty? Like, are you planning for that?
Yeah, no, so sorry. I didn't mean it in that way, but more understanding around reasonableness findings. So have the list there, but things in there like macroeconomic factors. And I think if you got a number of different economists there, or all of us from industry, we could come up with a lot of reasons that are in macroeconomic factors. So I think, having a little bit more there, would be helpful. I also think that, the definition around like meaningfulness and based on the financial capacity of the entity, it's really unclear what that means.
I see. So I think I totally hear what you're saying. I'm not Jessica, and I think that those will probably be more fleshed out in the rulemaking, right? Rather than in the principles for this discussion. I think, but I hear what you're saying on that. Okay, thank you for clarifying, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. This is something we're going to start talking about with the technical group at their November meeting after Thanksgiving, but wanted to share with you all that we're definitely hearing this. We need more information about the reasonableness and what this means and how do we prove something is reasonable or not if we're trying to claim act of God or state mandate. So we are starting to think about putting together something for payers. We'll get to providers, but at this point for payers, that's focused on almost like a choose your own adventure style, where if you think this is the factor that caused you to exceed the cost growth target, these are the kinds of questions that OHA might want to ask in that determining reasonableness conversation. These are the kind of data points that might be helpful. These are the kinds of analyses that you might want to look into internally in your own data. It's essentially how to prepare for those conversations. So we're going to be shopping that, getting more feedback on how to make that as helpful as possible. But I think, as Felicia said, we're in this tension of wanting this to be as flexible as possible, because there are things we can't predict and we can't always get it exactly, we can't map it all out immediately from the beginning, but wanting to provide some more clarity on how to prepare for these conversations, what to expect in these conversations, how to, make the case that cost growth was for a good reason. And we will plan to put guidance out on that for payers and for providers in the future.
Thanks. And then Sarah, can you circle back with Kate on that as well? Because I think she added in the chat about fall outside of the considerations on consumers, and I think that's part of the discussion. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I was just curious in that rulemaking, and it probably doesn't belong in the philosophy section, but in the rulemaking, if we have a facility that has an act of God and needs to rebuild a tower, and they pass those costs through in their negotiations with health plans, how do we think about the health plans cost changes relative to maybe that upstream cost? And I think it's just going to be important to be able to track. We've identified, and appropriately so, changes in staffing costs that impacts the provider, but it gets passed through the system, and we need to be able to track that in some reasonable way, and that may not be easy, Sarah. But there needs to be some, I think, as you say, choose your own adventure. How do we understand the rolling impact of some of those components?
So I think I feel like we are a little, it's interesting to me because I think we're about ready to head into comments on rulemaking and on the different other components that are sort of that are out there. So I feel like I think it's actually pretty difficult for me to facilitate this conversation in a way because it's not super linear, frankly, and I am a super linear person. And so we talk to many of my coworkers, I have many challenges with this. So I think one of the challenges is we're sort of skipping around, right? So if there's guidance on the performance improvement plans, right? So there's guidance on reasonableness that I think Sarah's talking about. I think a lot of these things fall into reasonableness on the sort of pass-through that Peter has raised. What is an act of God? The consumer conversation that Kate raised, right? Those are all health costs, pharmacy costs, all of that, where I think we are going to spend a lot of our time in the committee trying to work on and deal with, is there any way to control costs that even fall into the reasonable bucket, right? The vast majority of our work should be on trying to figure out that reasonableness. Then there's the performance improvement plans, right? This is, okay, we haven't met the reasonableness test. And then there's the performance improvement plan piece of this, where I think we also have an advisory committee working on sort of, and feedback that's happening on the performance and improvement plan piece of this. And I don't think we've fully talked about those PIPs because in this setting as much as we maybe could and maybe we should have. I think that's coming up on a future work plan. Oh, it is not. Okay, Sarah's shaking her head. I already have like amnesia from like 4 slides ago. I'm so ready for Thanksgiving. I feel like that there is the sort of PIP conversation that's happening and what those look like, right? And so how does that work? And frankly, I think it's very hard to decide what goes into a performance improvement plan until somebody sort of gets there because they've had to sort of not meet the reasonable test. And now we're literally talking about a financial penalty that is not very linear. It seems like it doesn't take all of those other things into account. And so what I would say is, so I guess the question that I have is, given all of those other things, do we feel like those principles, these sort of set of principles that we're going to hand to the health authority that says, you're coming up with a set of things for people who have stepped completely out of the bounds. Because I think we can all agree that by the time, I hope that one of the understandings we have here is by the time that an institution gets to financial penalties, they are out of bounds. They have said, they really have thumbed their finger at the Oregon Health Authority. Right? And we all know which finger I'm talking about. So, mixing my metaphors here. So by the time you get here, are these the principles that we want to follow for those organizations that have completely stepped out of bounds? Or is there something that we're missing? Melissa.
Yeah, I do think there's something on timing of some of this, and I think I understand and agree, Lisa, with what you're saying. One of the challenges, we talk about over the course of 3 years, within, there's kind of this long timeline, but then penalties start. And I just wonder about the timeline for the performance and improvement plan and the penalty and kind of how that kind of continues. Because if you just kind of can't, these are large, in a lot of cases, the organizations are large and, healthcare is slow to change. And so I just, between when a performance improvement plan is put in place, understanding the timeline from the organization that is under that potential performance improvement plan to kind of make adjustments and see that happening, I think we're kind of always looking in arrears. So how we think about those two pieces come together. And I think it's along your linear timeline a little bit of something's identified, a plan is put in place. It isn't probably really showing up and actionable for several years because we keep, we're kind of how those two pieces come together and play a part, I think is important for maybe some further clarification and timing.
So I think one of the things we might want to add then to the corrective guidance. I actually think it might be in here. Penalties levied, entities should be given the opportunity to engage in structured, supportive, and transparent performance improvement plans. I think one of the guidance we should add in here is before penalties kick in, there should be that they should be showing some sort of reasonableness around moving towards that plan. You might have employed a strategy that might not be quite working yet, but at least you've employed it.
Yes.
Right? You haven't been like, I'm not doing that. So I feel like maybe that's a change here is like and that's, I think, a language tweak, but I get what you're saying.
And I think that might be a place where, again, if you read everything just at the surface, there is maybe an anxiety driven belief that it's, if you exceed the cost growth target every year, 3 strikes and you're out and it's sort of automatic. I think the guidance isn't all written and developed yet, but I think the way we've been thinking about it is that, of course, if you're working on a PIP and you're showing progress on your PIP, whether or not that's translated into your cost growth trend has now met the target in the future year, if you're implementing and showing that progress on implementing your PIP, then that would count. But I agree that that's not yet clear in the
language and the principles. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think adding that to the principles is clear. So if you are showing progress, there you go. So I've seen some hands come up and down. And so, but I'm having a hard time tracking and I probably should stop taking notes. I think the staff can do that. And apparently this is recorded. Okay.
I was one of the hands up and down, but you guys covered it. And I agree, Melissa, that the linear timeline might be a little longer, especially because we are looking so far in arrears, and then by the time we're able to implement and see the results of that. So that's my long way of saying, Melissa, I agree with you.
Okay, and then I saw Julie's hand popped up and down.
Yeah, I was just going back to the principles and gonna just comment on equity.
But if we moved off of that, that's fine too. To
No,
something
Julie,
different.
do it.
So okay. So I just think equity is something we might want to reconsider the title of. That's something generally for the patient consumer space, about driving equity there, not necessarily in this space. Obviously, the deterrence line I think is the most important one of this grouping here. So we might just want to. I don't have a solution top of mind, but we might want to think about the use of the term equity in our guiding principles. So
How about we make that size, and how about we make it size?
yeah,
Right,
I
it's really-
I think that the key one is that last line there about the impactful enough. So maybe that rises to the top, or maybe that's a standalone one, and then we figure out how the others.
Yeah.
Just reading through it earlier might be an area.
That's great. Thank you. Other hands that I missed popping up or down that want to jump in here, or if I didn't, that want to jump in here?
Sorry, I'm not quick enough to raise my hand and go off mute. So.
Long-time listener, first
Oh.
time. I mean,
Hi,
does it
Jeremy.
make sense to just have a section that mentions reasonableness? I mean, we've talked about it a lot. Some of the information I've read previously. Do we need to add a section? I mean, there seems to be 4 sections here in the document. I mean, should this committee have a statement on reasonableness that guides the rulemaking process, that we think it's important that reasonableness is factored in?
Can I jump in? I think, Jeremy, we
Yeah.
haven't done that because that's in statute. We already have that statutory direction. I think if the committee would like to see that reflected in the principles, that is well in line with statute, and we can add that, but I think it's not currently in there because it's not necessary. We already have that direction.
Good clarification. Thank you.
Jessica?
The one other piece, I think, in there, the term of financial viability, the threat to financial viability, is something we need to address. I think that's a really harsh penalty, right? Like that could be market disruptive. Back to why I agree with Kate's impact on consumers, right? Market disruption impacts consumers, and so it can be a meaningful penalty, but the threat of financial viability, I think, is a little bit harsh. So I think if we, make sure we say something in the edits I sent, making sure we don't cause market disruption or impose additional costs on consumers, but also need to think about the deterrence effect of the reputational impact. So, I'll speak for payers. We don't want it to be out there that we can't contain costs, right? So there is definitely that piece of it, but that language is still of concern to me.
Thanks, Jessica. So Jessica sent some language that I think could be changed here. So penalty should have a reasonable upper limit. The market disruption impose additional costs on consumers. I think that we can sort of wordsmith that. That language does seem harsh, and so I'll leave it up to the staff to make those changes. I think on the sort of evaluating on the reputation, I just want to remind people, by the time you've gotten to financial penalties, your ass has been dragged. Like you have been posted up in the public documents around how you didn't meet it, and then you have been put on a PIP, and that's probably public. And then you didn't do your PIP, like you've been dragged already. So I don't know if you get to this point, like how much more worse it could be for you. Like you're I don't know. That'll be great. Your ass has been dragged is now part of the public record. Greg?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Also, like keeping the view of the consumer in view with regard to this question, or the language as well, where I mean, in many ways, at least in my mind, when I'm thinking about the financial penalty, the reason for the mechanism for implementing a mechanism like that is to disincentivize or provide a mechanism for addressing cost growth, which has, as you know, clearly a negative impact on people's ability to get healthcare. So I think it's important to keep both sides of that of the situation in balance here when we're considering the importance of a meaningful and how significant of a financial penalty we think should be imposed.
So I think what I'm hearing, I think both to your and Kate's comments on we're changing number 2 to sort of be meaningful enough to deter future behavior. I think then adding something a little bit in there about the impact on the consumer piece too, that should be kept in mind. Okay, so one last call on these. Any other thoughts on this? So I'm going to just do Stefan.
Yeah, I just wanna say that, like, you know, just to counterbalance the discussion a bit on this financial incentives or financial penalties. You know, if we come to that place, you know, really talking about an organization that really has exceeded cost targets substantially. So that really hurts for consumers at this point, right? So I think there's a certain question here to ask about, like, whether this organization is capable of doing the kind of work we're doing. So it's, you know, I think it's balancing, it needs to balance a little bit this in both ways, right? I think we're really talking about an organization that doesn't seem to be capable of controlling costs.
Andrew.
Thank you. And apologies, I had to step away for a minute. It's DCBS's 30th anniversary this year, and our first ever director just popped in the office to record a video and say hi. So, but is this the last call for all comments or just on section 2? Because I just had a few things to share.
No, just share away, Andrew. We're jumping all over the place.
All right. And it's just a few quick things. So first, and I'll put a text suggestion in the chat, just on the intro part. You know, the last meeting, I really stressed that compliance from a regulatory perspective, like at least our goal is always, you know, whatever you're doing, it's to achieve compliance. And I didn't see the word compliance anywhere in here. So I just had a few words maybe we can add at the end of the first paragraph, just to stress that compliance is the goal. I just put that in the chat. On the equity section, somebody just said this, like access to care is probably a good component to really stress that the penalties that we list a couple things that we should not impact. Access to care, I think, would be a good thing there. And on deterring future behavior, might want to stress that that's both for the entity who's, you know, in the plan as well as for others. You know, financial penalties can deter others from that. On the transparency section, I think it's the last comment. We say how the funds collected. We list a couple things and we say it should be transparent. Might want to say must be transparent. I think it's more than an aspirational goal. It's a requirement. And I think that was it. Thank you.
Great. Any other additions before I do a quick summary?
Lisa, I have a process suggestion, but I can do that after you summarize.
Okay. So I just the quick summary is when we start with the corrective guidance, we need to add some language around achieving compliance that Andrew just outlined, and then the PIP strategies should be employed in showing progress, which I think Melissa and several people agreed with. That it might not necessarily reduce costs, but the strategies that are part of the PIP should be employed. On the number 2, which we are changing, we're going to change the title of this around deterrence of future behavior, not only for the entity, but for others, and that it should be the meaningfulness of this should include what the effect and impact is on the consumers. Should be taken into consideration. And I think we might want to note here the reasonableness in the statute, Sarah, just to tie it back to what Jeremy's comments were. And then on the transparency, it is the must be added. So this has got to be a transparent process throughout. And I think just being very clear that it's transparent from the very beginning when the report comes out all the way through the financial penalties. With those changes, are these sort of the guiding sort of set of principles that we would like to give so that the OHA can head into rulemaking? And then I'm very clear that please submit when the rulemaking advisory councils come together, there's a technical advisory group, there's lots of other places to add additional comments into around as these things get flushed out more. So, can I get it, Jessica?
Can you put up the edits? It's hard for me to.
So this is my
vote on it
proposed.
without seeing.
Let me summarize. I think it's going to take a little bit to make the edits and do a red line. I would like to propose sending out a revised version over email to the committee members that summarizes the changes discussed today. I think, Felisa, Peter, I'll defer to you if you want to do a formal vote on that or not, but I think my goal would be, we're in general agreement, these are the principles. If there are any additional edits or, things people want to raise, feel free to do that over email, but I think the goal would be to not have another committee discussion about the financial penalties because we want to start rulemaking and this will help do that.
Yeah, so Sarah, I just want to remind us back about our sort of principles of operation here on this committee, as I feel like I don't want to take a vote. What I'd like to sort of get from people is a general, like, this is headed in the right direction on these principles. I know that there's some wordsmithing that needs to be done and some changes with those additions. And I'm going to be really frank with people, they might not be laid out specifically how you would write them, but the reality is then you're going to head into rulemaking and it will be the rules that matter the most, not the principles. And the rules is what's going to impact organizations. I feel like what we're giving is guidance. And so I'm going to operate sort of based on a consensus model. Is there anybody who cannot live with the outlined principles with the changes that we just discussed?
Lisa, it's really
I'm not
hard for me
seeing
to
any
answer that
things.
without seeing it. Actually, I don't know what changes got in or didn't.
I
And I
see.
don't actually understand the full process. So we're giving, like, I'm a very visual person. If I could understand how our work here impacts the next steps of the process. Rulemaking sounds like there's a lot of importance there. And if we're giving guidance, I think generally I'm in favor of what we said, but I would appreciate time to be able to actually look at it.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, so Sarah's put those in the chat, and what I'm hearing from Ginny is that she cannot live with the sort of direction that we're headed in, based on that she's a visual learner and hasn't been able to see it written out yet. Is there anybody else who cannot live with what sort of we've discussed here?
I just think it's just understanding what it finally looks like, we generally
Okay.
agree with what we've outlined, but how this comes together in a formal and final document to provide that, I think is helpful.
Okay, so what I will say is I just want to remind people that we will not be determining the rules in this group, but I think what we can do, Sarah will send out the formal sort of revisions and edits, and then I'll just note that we did not reach consensus on here because we had two people who couldn't live with the direction, and that those will come to you via email, and that we're not going to have another discussion about this at this committee. So I want to note that now. And so if you have additional feedback or thoughts on the direction, my encouragement would be that as a board member, that you engage and give Sarah and the staff those formal comments. And then know that all of those comments should be submitted, I feel like, as a board member. If your organization has comments, then I would suggest that you submit those organizationally. Just to remind people of the different roles. Okay. Great. And then we're headed into rulemaking. So I think that what I've learned in this discussion, Sarah, is I do feel like what we may need actually, as we head through this, is actually learning, because I think there's going to be a lot of these sort of rulemaking implementation things that are very separate from the sort of advisory role we play as a board. And so actually what we might want to do is a separate learning on sort of how the process works, because I think that that will help people have clarity and make decisions. So
I can commit to sending out a little bit of a summary of what the process will look like and what's coming out when and where there are opportunities to engage. And I think that might be helpful to put it all together, because you're right, not all of this is on paper yet, Jessica, and it's confusing to know when conversations are happening where.
And I also think if you're not familiar with the government process of like people don't live and breathe, like, what is legislation? What is RACs? What are board meetings? Like, how does a RAC work? All of that, like, that's not their world. Rulemaking Advisory Committee, by the way, is the term for RAC that we all are talking about. That's what nobody's getting racked. So like, if you're not familiar with all of those things, I think this could be confusing. So we should do a sort of a learning on like how that works too, so that people can take a look at that. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
It's hard. No, it's hard for me to understand how. So we send our recommendation. What does RAC do with it, and where does it? Like, I don't know what has to happen with our recommendation after it comes from us.
Yeah. So thank you. So I have public comment next. Peter, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Sarah, did we receive any public comment?
We have not received any written public comment, but we have Tom Sincik who would like to give public comment today.
Great. Tom, if you could just state your full name and the organization or affiliation, and 2 minutes are yours, sir. Oh, you're on mute.
Tom Sincik, I'm a retired family nurse practitioner, Healthcare for All Oregon. And I would also say that I'm actually more of a payer than a consumer at this point in my life as a 73-year-old man, not, so we are the payers, right? So I think as we go forward, you have to think about the terminology and who's actually paying for the cost of healthcare. There are intermediate people, insurers, pharmacy benefit managers, things like that. I want to say that the mission of HCO very much matches exactly the issue of equity and affordability. And you can read our mission at hco.org. I want to say I appreciated the comments, and this is what I heard today. A very, very difficult goal of mitigating the cost. I would say probably nearly impossible or impossible under the current system. It's really a complex system within complex systems. Money made in transactions, that is waste in the middleman. Cost to providers, the complexity of that. Employers raising prices or cutting benefits of eroding care, or thinking about the HR cost of employers. Are they being captured? The PBMs. Do we know that United Healthcare is establishing itself very strongly in this under Optum in this state right now, including in connection with some of the organizations here? The private equity issue, which there was a discussion at the legislature, and so let me go on to the future. I didn't hear anybody addressing the constitutional right to healthcare in this state. That needs to be our goal overall as a state. We now have a constitutional right for Oregonians to have them access to healthcare. I did not hear the word transformation. I heard the words market and consumer. Healthcare can no longer be treated as a commodity. It is a right in this state. That's why I wear my hat that says healthcare is a human right. We didn't hear anything about the cost of redetermination. you know, the cost of providers of figuring this out. As people have been dropped off, now they come into provider offices and providers have to figure this out again. That's cost bearing to those providers, the direct providers of care. We hear a lot about, didn't hear about the blame. We did hear about a little bit about the blame between insurers and providers as to the cost drivers, right? So now I think about, I want to ask this question. We know that the Universal Health Plan Governance Board is being formed in this state to move us towards one system for everybody. How is this committee going to be working within that framework? It's under Andrew and DCBS at this time. I think it's very important that you bring that into your conversation going forward. Another thing I didn't hear was CEO salaries are not listed as a reason for cost driving, if I'm correct. They weren't one of those, you know, rights to pay people as much as they want to provide, you know, to take money from patients into large CEO salaries. So let's see if I got anything else on my list here.
Yeah.
I really appreciated this meeting. It was really great to hear what you all had to say. I know the values are there among the group, but we have a plan forward. We have a constitutional right to access to healthcare. We have the formation of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board. So the future is bright for Oregon to lead in the healthcare transformation. And I'm hoping that you will, this group as a cost control target, you will already be doing some of the work ahead of time when you figure out these cost drivers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your thoughts. Wrapping up. Anything that we need to think about? I think we've got the staff's got some work to do on the philosophical nature or our philosophy of that will influence rulemaking. I just want to note that I really appreciated that discussion today. I think that was a difficult place for me, and I think some of the comments and changes really helped me understand where we're headed, what we're asking the legislature to consider as we put some framework around that rulemaking process. Really excited about shortening the meetings. I think that's great. And those are my only comments. Felisa, anything else before we wrap up? We're a few minutes over time.
No, I really just want to say that I'm thankful for all of you as we head into Thanksgiving. So I hope that people have a time to celebrate and reflect on how thankful we are for Oregon.
And I think we're adjourned. Take care all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.